Mademoiselle from Armoured, parlez-vous. Mademoiselle from Armoured, parlez-vous. Mademoiselle from Armoured, she hasn't been kissed for 40 years. Hickey, picky, parlez-vous.
Well, I know I've spoken here before about World War I cartoonists. I don't know how many of you have listened to that before, and I know I included Heath Robinson in that, but this is a chance to look into his life and his career and how he got to be doing his First World War cartoons in a little more depth and detail. And if you'll indulge me at the end of the talk, I'm also going to talk about another artist who was a contemporary of Heath Robinson, a chap called John Hassall, who I wrote a book on last year. And I just think he had quite an interesting First World War career. And I'd like to do a little short piece at the end about him as well. And it sort of fits in quite nicely with Heath Robinson. So there is William Heath Robinson, and I was introduced to him through these magazines, which are in the Illustrated London News Archive, which I used to manage as a separate picture library, and then it moved to Mary Evans Picture Library, where I now work and actually have worked for the past 16 years. And the ILN archive consists of 9 different magazines, including The Sketch, which began in 1893 as a kind of younger, more gossipy sibling to the Illustrated London News, and also The Bystander, which launched in 1903. And William Heath Robinson would always say that he was fairly launched on his career as a humorous artist by the editor of The Sketch, Bruce Ingram's decision to publish him in The Sketch. And it really was a seedbed for some of Britain's most popular cartoonists and humorous illustrators. The Bystander did some early work for them, but probably his most fruitful period in that magazine is the 1920s, and I'll be showing some of those later. But let's start at the beginning. And he was born on the 31st of May, 1872, at Nis House, 25 Ennis Road, Stroud Green in North London. He was the son of Thomas Robinson and Eliza Heath. Thomas Robinson was an illustrator. He trained as a wood engraver, but he was an illustrator, and he was the chief illustrator for a weekly newspaper called the Penny Illustrated Paper. So Thomas Robinson's father, who was also called Thomas, had been a wood engraver as well, and he had trained with the famous Thomas Bewick. So Will was born into this family of commercial artists, basically, with their roots in the northeast, actually, because the elder Thomas Robinson, having trained with Bewick, came from County Durham. So it's maybe inevitable that Will was going to also become a magazine illustrator, but that isn't how he wanted to start out, actually. Just a few sort of pictures to set the scene. Wood engraving really gained pace in the 19th century, particularly with the launch of the Illustrated London News in 1842. And it was the practice of engraving onto boxwood, which was a very hard wood, which meant that thousands and thousands of copies could be printed. Therefore, it was the ideal medium for printing pictures in the illustrated press, which were being distributed to the public in tens of thousands of copies. So you can see it's very close, fine work. And you would have somebody with an eyeglass working on a piece of boxwood. If you needed a very large picture, you might have artists, engravers working on different pieces of box at time, and then they would be bolted together to make the complete picture. This is the master engraver, Thomas Bewick. So this might be William Heath Robinson's grandfather working with Thomas Bewick, who famously did lots of engravings of animals and birds. And then I rather like this, which is Wood's wood engraving establishment. You couldn't get a more appropriate surname, really. But there you are. They were called peckers because they were obviously always pecking away at these pieces of boxwood. Now, a lot of engravers did come down from the northeast, and they all settled in North London. I mean, there's even a road in Islington called Benwell Road, which, Benwell is an area of Newcastle. So there's this certainly diaspora of northeasterners coming down to London and setting up a bit of a community in that area. So William Heath Robinson was very much steeped in this tradition. This is a front cover of the Penny Illustrated Paper, which was probably done by Will's father. I should say that William was the third of 6 children. And he had two elder brothers, Thomas and Charles, who both became very successful, well-known illustrators, principally as book illustrators and with some magazine work. Then there was Will, and there were two sisters, and there was George as well. So I guess if you've got a Tom, a Charles, and a William, you're going to have a George as well. Now, by all accounts, including his own, Will had a very happy childhood. He was very modest about any prodigious talent towards art as a child, but he did talk about different influences and how they maybe helped to steer him towards the career he would eventually have. He recalls very happy trips to the theatre, but also making their own toy theatres at home. So he was kind of interested in the artistic and also the mechanical. And one of his favourite things to do was browse through the family's copy of Fox's Book of Martyrs and look at all the grisly endings that people had endured. And again, you can see how that influences those contraptions that you would later become well known for. He wasn't a particularly academic child. He went to Islington Probationary School, where there was a teacher, a female teacher, who ignited his interest in science with lessons in electricity and magnetism. And he recalled that in his memoirs. And again, he felt that probably influenced the way his mind worked. But I also want to show a few examples of the kind of art that Will was growing up in and was a contemporary of him at the moment. And this is an engraving of William Holman Hunt's illustration to The Lady of Shalott by Tennyson. So you've got, this is really an engraving from a piece of fine art with lots of detail there. Then later, contemporary of Will's is Aubrey Beardsley, who does these quite creepy, sinuous, but very beautiful Art Nouveau illustrations. And this is by William Heath Robinson in later life, and it's a beautiful music sheet cover. And I remember when a contributor brought this into Mary Evans Picture Library, and I thought, oh my God, I remember this, because we used to have this. We used to have a piano stool, and we had this music sheet, and I always used to pore over it and love the detail. But you can see the black and white, you can see the influence of engraving, of the sort of symmetry that you will get in Art Nouveau. And that is typical of that style. You can see where, how he became influenced by all those things that were happening artistically around him. Another big influence on loads of commercial artists at the time was Japanese art. So I'm just showing you a couple of examples here. Japan opened up to Westerners in the mid-19th century, and there was a real craze in the late 19th century for Japanese prints, lots of collecting, and artists were very interested in this new way, well, to them, that Japanese artists work, where they left lots of negative space and really let the figures and also the natural subjects that they tackled, just let them speak for themselves and gave them room to breathe. So look at that, and then look at this, which is one of William Heath Robinson's book illustrations from Charles Perrault's Old Time Tales, I think. And this one in particular, look at all that white space he's left. So, not being particularly academic and obviously coming from an artistic family, he enrolled at Islington School of Art and began what he called his marble period, where basically all he was told to do was copy statues, which was very much a traditional way that art students learnt in those days. And then he started to apply for the Royal Academy and was admitted on his second attempt to the Royal Academy schools, and that was in 1892. So he starts to, really he's set on course to train in art, and he wants to be a landscape painter. That's what he wants to do. I just want to show you these when we're talking about Japanese art. This is by his brother Charles, beautiful illustration from, I think, 1933 in Good Housekeeping magazine. And here's another one by Charles as well. And that is, massively sort of Japanese looking. And this is an illustration which Will did in 1900 for the poems of Edgar Allan Poe. He had begun illustrating for books when he realised that possibly a career as a landscape artist wasn't going to make him the money he hoped. He wouldn't support a wife and family. He had got engaged in 1899, eventually married Josephine Leyte, who was the daughter of John Leyte, who'd been the assistant editor of the Illustrated London News. Again, lots of networking among this community. And he just thought, I need to find regular income. And Thomas and Charles Robinson were both becoming quite successful book illustrators. And at this time, it's a real golden age for book illustration. There's lots of very lavish gift books with tipped-in colour plates, exquisite illustrations by the likes of Arthur Rackham, Edmund Dulac, and that kind of thing. And he joins them. He is on a par with these illustrators. And by 1897, I think in 1897, he illustrated his first 5 books and continued until the First World War to illustrate books on a regular basis. But if you looked at this, which is done in 1900, I don't think you would ever, who's that? Nobody would ever think that's William Heath Robinson. So it's quite interesting to see where he came from. 1902, he actually wrote and illustrated his own children's story, The Adventures of Uncle Lubin. And here is an illustration from that. It was published by a young publisher called Grant Richards, and it was very, very successful. And he later on, a few years later, he would do another book similar called Bill the Minder. But what actually caused Will to start working more for magazines was another project he did with Grant Richards, which was a very, very luxurious edition of Rabelais. And it took him most of a year to do 100 full-page illustrations, 100 smaller vignette illustrations. And unfortunately, the project was going to be the financial undoing of Grant Richards, and he went bust. And poor Will received very, very little from the entire project. So magazines, illustrated magazines, are looking for any artists with ideas and ability. So there he is. This is him actually in 1918, but it gives you an idea of what he's like. He's a very modest, diffident man, full of humour, but not in any way a showman or anything. He was always surprised at how much people loved his illustrations. But he starts to take his portfolio around to magazines. In 1905, he has a couple of cartoons published in The Bystander and The Tatler, but it's this 1906 beginning of this relationship with the sketch that really sets him on the path to becoming a cartoonist. And the first series he does for the sketch is The Gentle Art of Catching Things. Again, he's still sort of finding his way. It's not a typical Heath Robinson style, it's a little bit elongated, the figures and stuff, but this was very popular. You might look at this and go, why is that funny? But he's just getting into his stride, should I say. I just wanted to show you a couple of other artists who were were kind of found fame in the sketch. This is George Studdy, who created this little dog called Bonzo, who became a global megastar and featured on everything from salt and pepper pots to jelly moulds to trivets to colouring books, etc. And there's George Studdy there. And it was the sketch where he became famous. And then in the Second World War, David Wright, who was Britain's leading pin-up artist. And these were called David Wright's Lovelies and were published every week in the sketch and were meant to be torn out and obviously pinned onto barrack room walls and stuff. So the sketch is kind of the magazine for great illustrators. So this, I think, dates from 1910, Half Hours at Eton, which was another series he did. And this is one of those Heath Robinson ideas which is actually works quite well. It's quite economical because what he's renowned for, what he becomes renowned for, is creating incredibly convoluted machines which achieve what is actually a very simple aim in the end. But I think this is a very good way to give Eton schoolboys a haircut. This next series, Little Games for the Holidays, this is called Bouncing the Beecham for public schoolboys. And this is a silly little game where someone with a mallet hits a sort of catapult which sends a tiny little ball into the air and all the boys wait with nets. And it was so popular that a group of Royal Engineers stationed in Hong Kong actually played their own version of Bouncing the Beecham and sent in photographs to the sketch so that they could show readers how people had been affected by his cartoons. So already Heath Robinson is making a name for himself with the public. Here's another one. Pitching the poached egg for territorial officers. But then, in 1910, he does this series, and this is kind of signals the beginning of his First World War adventures. It's called Am Tag, die Deutschen kommen. So it's all about the time around 1909, 1910, where there is a very British paranoia about the rising militarism of Germany, about their naval and military expansion. Lord Northcliffe had, a few months before these cartoons came out, had engaged the socialist writer and editor of the Clarion, Robert Blatchford, to write a series of 10 articles in the Daily Mail, all about the threat of a German invasion. So this is what Will took as his inspiration. And I suppose back in 1910, maybe this paranoia did seem a little bit over the top. And so what he's doing is kind of diluting any fear people might have about this with humour. And that's what he did all through the war, when the war did eventually break out, and Lord Northcliffe and Robert Blatchford were proved right. But this is a series of cartoons showing how Germans will disguise themselves and do dastardly things in Britain. So here they are dressed as statues in the British Museum, in the Greco-Roman galleries. Or here they are disguised as British passengers crossing the North Sea, but what gives them away is they've got boxes and boxes of lager and Schwarzbrot and sausages with them, just to keep them going. So this is the most famous cartoon in the Am Tag series, which is German Spies in Epping Forest. And it shows German officers, they've always got their Pickelhaube helmets on, which gives them away, but they're dressed as an assortment of ludicrous birds and woodland animals, and they are stalking a very innocent little Boy Scout who's just ambling along in Epping Forest. Illustrators love Boy Scouts during this period, by the way, because the Scouts started in 1908, so they always feature in cartoons. Apparently in 1915, somebody sent Will this cartoon. It had been published in a German newspaper with some words which implied that the Germans felt that this cartoon meant that the British were genuinely scared of the Germans invading. And the correspondent with Will said, I don't think the Germans have got the same sense of humour as us. Anyway. Here they are in bathing huts trying to, get their way into the country. Or they're messing with signposts, so dispatches go awry. Or on this occasion, you've got British soldiers holding someone hostage. So, it's showing that if the Germans do invade, then the British can hold their own against them. So in 1914, all this fuss, all this paranoia turns out, I suppose, in a little way to be true. And the Germans invade Belgium and Britain declares war. And straight away, Will says that cartoonists turned their attention to what he called the all-consuming topic. And he already had the German soldiers ready-made. He had this blueprint from his Am Tag series 4 years previously. And so he just set about to militarise his good ideas, basically. And this is an early one. I think this was November 1914, first lesson in the goose step. And you can see at the top, it's this series of cartoons. His early series was called Culture. And I've spoken about this before, but to the Germans, this phrase, this word meant, German culture and greatness. And to the British, it was viewed as with great sarcasm, because after seeing what the Germans did in terms of destroying culture in Belgium as they rampaged across it, culture was the very opposite of what they considered to be that. Anyway, Will often incorporates this little Gosling into his cartoons, and there it is, helping the troops of German soldiers perfect their goose step. I just want to show this cartoon, which is by Edmund Sullivan, who drew the Kaiser's garland, and created this very disturbing vision of the German soldier as a great sort of ogre, a monster, and it's quite unsettling, quite savage. And I just wanted to show that to sort of contrast the way that William Heath Robinson tackles all the what the war is throwing at everybody. This, I think, is one of his very first cartoons of the war, and it's trying to lure German spies out of a flat on Tottenham Court Road by sizzling sausages on the street below. And you can just, you maybe can't see here, but actually you can just see a nostril kind of appearing over the windowsill, taking the scent. So already there is this concern about German spies in Britain, and Will taps into that straight away. This is another in the Culture series, which is new recruits being put through their paces. And there's that little Gosling again, where they are. This is at strafing school, and this is a way to kill innocent little Goslings. Will didn't often show actual people. He didn't do caricatures of leading figures in the war. And this is about the closest he got. And this is the Kaiser enjoying a morning tub in his new campaigning car. So that is him. And I like this sort of soldier by the roadside, sort of genuflecting at the Kaiser as he goes through his morning ablutions. And then in 1915, Will does another series, which is called German Breaches of the Hague Convention. And I guess the kind of idea behind this is to suggest all the ways that Germans are perfidious and they don't play by the rules. And this is number one, and this is them using magnets to take the buttons off Tommy's trousers so they can't fight because their trousers fall down. Or they stalk through the long grass and they whittle onions to encourage lachrymosity, so it makes all the Tommies cry. These are some Tommy scolders, but they have no effect at all because the Tommies simply put up some umbrellas to protect themselves from the boiling water raining down on them. So it's all very kind of Tom and Jerry-like. There's, all these people. There are a lot of illustrations and cartoons which are showing the real sort of stark horror of the war, and Will prefers to make people laugh, and by doing that, he is, sort of just diluting the fear that people maybe are feeling. Here's another German breach, and this is injecting chilblains into Tommy's feet. And this is, of course, based on reality. You've got engineering teams, tunnellers going underneath and things, but this is what they're doing instead of laying mines. Or they could, they're shelling the British with Tacho bombs, and Tacho was a hair restorer. So they have got a very sudden, alarming hair growth, which is worrying them all. Oh, this is the bayonet curler. And this is really typical when people think of Heath Robinson, this is the sort of machine that they think of. So you can really see how this is developing into, I guess, what he will always become known and loved for. There's another one, another typical machine. Oh, this is the Harley scope for detecting mines and laying mines. It's rather wonderful. You can see all the Germans. He always portrays the Germans as sort of portly and greedy, and they've often got their Pickelhaube helmets on. And actually, that's quite an old-fashioned view of them. It's quite a real caricature of them, but it sort of works very well in this scenario. Oh, this is extracting barbs from barbed wire so that the barbed wire is no longer effective. And another thing that happened was people loved his cartoons so much. Soldiers at the front, it made them laugh. They saw the worst of things, but they liked what Heath Robinson did, and they often wrote him letters, often actually making suggestions about new contraptions. And this is a really lovely excerpt from a letter he received in November 1916. Some frightful war pictures have just reached our mess within the last few days, and you can have no idea how much the illustrations are appreciated out here. All members of this mess have been at it since the very beginning, and your sketches in the various magazines have always been a source of great amusement to us. And this particular drawing, which is training wasps to sting Highlanders' legs, was suggested to him by a lieutenant colonel. So I think any suggestion that he is making light of the war is unfounded, because actually what soldiers really wanted was some light relief, and he gave it to them and made them chuckle. The sub Zep Marinellen for making sure of your enemies, and poor lady sort of carrying some fruit or something in a boat is being attacked on both sides there. Oh, this is getting German troops to clear Belgian floodlands by basically pouring lager and sausages into it. And you can see a row of, again, very portly German soldiers just hoovering up the floods, no problem. Oh, this is stopping rifles. And then this cartoon, which is from the Illustrated Sporting Dramatic News. The Illustrated Sporting Dramatic News is A3 size, printed on very good quality paper, and his cartoons in there are always excellent. And this one, I think, if anything is to sum up the absurdity of war and the pointlessness of it, it's this, which shows a Swiss shepherd, very much at leisure, smoking his pipe with his sheep grazing around him, just looking across the border where all hell has broken loose. Good idea. And on a similar theme, this is a French poodle that's had the temerity to allow the tip of its tail to cross the border into Germany. And you see the German soldiers are outraged at this. Now, Will was too old to join up, born in 1872. So he also drew quite a lot of cartoons about the home front as well. And this is, I think this is also from Sporting Dramatic News, if I remember rightly. And it's called Example of British Frivolity. That's it. So this Zeppelin has knocked over this building and revealed a couple who are having a little kiss in bed or something. But I think it's rather nice. This is called camouflage. Intelligent use of camouflage in exposed metropolitan areas. And this is the stretching sheds of an oxtail soup factory. So he did quite a lot about rationing, about air raids, those sort of experiences. He was living in Pinner in Middlesex at the time. He and his wife had 5 children, a daughter Joan and 4 sons. And he did often, he could witness the air raids over London from the vantage point in Pinner. And, was very aware of it all. So it provided very useful material for some of his cartoons. Again, here are some machines to ensure you don't eat too much when you are dining out. So it's all related to rationing, of course, or food control. And in 1918, he'd reached such a level of popularity is that the International News Bureau, which was an American news service, asked him to spend some time with the American troops so that he could draw American soldiers doing what the British soldiers have been doing. And this is showing some barb trousers where they can get through barbed wire with some silly trousers. Now, if you think about Nick Park and Aardman animation and the wrong trousers, and Nick Park has certainly said in the past that William Heath Robinson is a big influence on him. And I think that possibly the wrong trousers, he may have seen that illustration. And this is the new mortar for bridging chasms. Again, you've got some American soldiers there. And for Will, this was his first time abroad. And he recounts in his autobiography, My Line of Life, how he didn't have his papers with him when he was in Saint-Nazaire, which is, of course, the main gateway for the American troops entering France. And he was quizzed by a French policeman. He thought he was going to be arrested. He was very much an innocent abroad. And, of course, he drew himself in that situation. I'm not quite sure what happened. I think maybe an officer who knew him vouched for him and it was okay. But it was very close. He nearly got thrown into prison. And then when the war came to an end, again, this was more material, more ideas. So he set some of these characters unbullying beef left over from the war. And then there's lots of things about reconstruction and about celebrating the end of the war. Afforestation, a good beginning in the provinces, planting lots of trees everywhere. temporary reconstruction of a letterbox. Doesn't look very effective, but nevertheless. Oh, demobilising the Secret Service. I rather like this. You know, people dressed as post boxes and things like that, going in one and then coming out just as normal civilians on the other side. So there he is, and he's had a very, very successful First World War. He moves to Cranley in Surrey towards the end, and he's such a kind soul. There are some German prisoners of war who are stationed in a large house close to where he lives, and some of them are tasked with, you know, working on his land, and he's told not to feed them, but he can't resist leaving a bit of bread and cheese and cocoa for them, which they quietly take, and nobody says anything. And he's got sympathy for them. He thinks they are just ordinary men like anybody else, and he hopes that they get home and you know, live a nice life. So he has no malice. He bears the Germans no malice, really. And I think that very much comes across in the tone of his cartoons. And he's popular because of it. They're very palatable, but they, you know, there is a message in there all the same. So after the war, he goes on to, I just wanted to sort of share with you more. I didn't want to just stop at the First World War. He's really perfected this technique of creating helpful solutions for very simple tasks. So this is gentleman, a pressing engagement. I can't remember what he's doing here. Gentleman demonstrating a simple device for correcting a neglected figure. Well, could all do with a bit of that, perhaps. Bound to draw another well thought out experiment in self-dentistry. Pulling a tooth with a Heath Robinson contraption. This is a very elaborate trouser presser. If you can see in the top left in the bedroom, there's the trousers being stretched with the help of motor running, the cat's watching, everything happening. So when you hear, it's a bit Heath Robinson. These are the sort of things where that phrase, that adjective came from. I decided catch, there we are. A very canny fisherman using a device. And this one is wonderful. This is how to eat peas. And then he also gets a lot of work from kind of companies who are construction companies. This is for, I think, Turner's Asbestos Company. Well, that's not a very kind of, you know, if you are Turner's Asbestos Company, you think, how can I do some exciting advertising? Well, you turn to somebody like William Heath Robinson, who can provide you with, you know, sort of these wonderful contraptions and make people laugh, and you can be associated with that. So I think it's quite enlightened of you know, whoever was in charge at these sort of companies to engage Heath Robinson to do their brochures and their adverts, etc. Moving on a little bit, these are some colour illustrations which appeared in a sketch in 1933, which is called An Ideal Home, and they were ideas for dealing with congested living. He was very interested in people living in flats, because in the 1930s, more purpose-built flats were being built, and it was very much becoming a way of life. So he drew a series like this. And also at the 1934 Ideal Home exhibition, he created sort of a small but to scale house called the Gadgets, which had loads of little moving machinery and people in it, which was a very popular exhibit at that show. I like this one. Everyone, the table can just go. When I lived in a 2-bedroom flat with 3 children, I could have done with that, actually. It's nice to show you this as well, which is every year he would contribute a full-colour illustration, obviously done in watercolour, to Holly Lee's, which was the Christmas number of the Illustrated Sporting Dramatic News. And I think these are absolutely charming, these illustrations. And they also show that original hankering to be a landscape artist, his talent as a book illustrator. So that never really left him. But the characterization is very typically Heath Robinson. You've got sort of roly-poly barmaids and sweet children. It's typically him, but it's not a machine. So it's quite, you know, nice to see that he would occasionally allow himself to do things like this. And there's another one from the following year, which is called The Toast, which I think is just lovely. And he continued to work for lots of different magazines. His son Oliver was, I think, art editor of Nash's magazine. He did front covers for The Humorist. He did quite a number for them, and London Opinion magazine as well. And the Bystander probably took over from the Sketch in terms of publishing him the most frequently, and he did some absolutely brilliant things for him. And they're not always featuring machines or gadgets. This is just a hilarious idea. Some close shaves at St Andrews, and the ball just misses everybody at just the right time. And this is one of my favourites, and it's the simplest idea, but it's just such typical British humour. Justly incensed spouse. Good heavens, he's got the thermos. Forget the husband. What about the thermos flask? I think this is quite a famous advert of his, so you may recognise this. And he's contrasting a house without Hovis, where everybody looks thin and irritable, with a very happy and contented house that does eat Hovis, which I think maybe could reflect Will's own family life, both as a child and through his marriage. And he also did work for Ransoms of Ipswich, the lawnmower company. And then in the Second World War, I thought it'd be interesting to show you some examples of that. He collaborated with a friend and neighbour, Cecil Hunt, on a couple of books which were looking at different ideas to cope with things like rationing and air raids. And they are much more sort of simple illustrations, these pen and ink line drawings, but very effective nevertheless. Here's the Psycho car for petrol economy, and I wonder if Hanna-Barbera looked at that when they were creating Fred Flintstone, for instance. And then he goes back to the Sketch and does a series of illustrations for them, which are very much similar to his First World War drawings as well. And this is it's getting spies or out of a church steeple in a very convoluted manner. And this is probably his most famous cartoon of the Second World War. The sixth column strategy, stout patriots attempting to dislodge a gunner from the dome of St. Paul's. Wonderful, wonderful idea. Rational gadgets for your coupons. So it's just a look of the draw, who gets a decent portion and who doesn't. At Mary Evans, we are in a continual state of wanting to scan things and not having the time. So before I put this talk together, I actually just went through a few volumes of the Sketch to find some of his World War II cartoons which we hadn't scanned. So that's why they are literally just snapped from the pages. But here you go. You can see that he is really sort of replicating that style. I think his drawing style has changed a little bit. His characters, his figures are a little bit more sort of bold, a little bit more deliberate. But the same kind of ideas are coming through. British secret weapons to surprise the Boche, the Jerry Scarer, a new mortar. This one is rather good. They're all dressed up as a big mortar bomb. Rational gadgets for your coupons. This is who gets trousers. Yeah, it's deciding who gets new trousers. This one. I love this one actually. A few more Italian divisions, the Oasis trap. So there's the Italians seeing an oasis which has got basically tables with wine and food and, good times. And the Italians straight away go, oh yeah. And they're about to be swallowed up into that net. How to make it hard for the raiders, the spotter's friend for returning the enemy's fire. And I think, some of these ideas get more and more elaborate. Heath Robinson actually died in 1944, so I think it's quite, interesting that he is still working away, producing these cartoons on a regular basis for the Sketch. And he had heart problems and wasn't well. He wasn't able to do a lot of things he liked doing. He in his youth and when he was well, he loved rambling with friends and then finishing off a walk with a stop in a local hostelry. And him and his friends called themselves the Froth Finders Federation. So he was, very keen on just doing that sort of thing, and obviously he wasn't able to do that with his heart problems. So I suppose being able to continue to draw and apply his skills to keeping up morale during the Second World War was one thing he could do. The banana skin tank skidder. So So it's firing banana skins so the tanks go all over the place. How to make it hard for the raiders, a brilliant plan for the deception of dive bombers. This is particularly good. I'm going to let you look at that for a while, actually, because you can see that they've put sort of a landscape with buildings perpendicular to the actual ground. So the raiders are very confused and are firing horizontally. Experiment in camouflage, just dressing up as Stonehenge. So, I suppose he's recycling some of his ideas. Oh yeah, this is another, an anti-tank trap on the Brighton Road. How to go to ground without getting up, the disappearing villa for air raid safety. And that's fantastic. It just simply disappears into the ground. So he's not well, but I love this. I found this little picture in one of our magazines. I think it was in the Bystander. And this is a fellow artist, Norman Keane, who is applying Will's designs to a shop window. So it's had to be boarded up, and they've painted little Heath Robinson designs over the shop window during the war. It's rather nice. And here is, he did a book, again with Cecil Hunt, which I think was called How to Make a New World. And here we are, adaptation of a tank to peacetime requirements. There's lots of very interesting ideas about how to adapt certain wartime things for real life. More cheerful and musical air raid warnings. So they're just joyous, really. And I think you've got to, we don't know what he was like, but he comes across as a very, very likeable man, very, very modest, unassuming, but out of that came these incredible ideas. So there he is. He died on the 13th of September 1944, so didn't see the end of the war, which is a great shame. But he's the only artist in the English dictionary whose name is the root of an adjective, and I think when anybody says it's a bit Heath Robinson, I'm sure everybody here knows what that means. So as I say, I'm just going to very quickly talk about this other artist, John Hassall. Now, this picture shows the London Sketch Club, of which Will was a member, and it was formed in the 1890s. And the idea was that it was a group of men, male artists, who would meet every Friday evening, and they would do a drawing for 2 hours, and then they would stop and they would do a friendly critique of each other's work, and obviously they would be drinking, plenty of it, food, songs, jokes, that kind of thing. And it was a real kind of brotherhood and a very important club for a lot of artists. Now, if you look here, on the left, in the middle, there's Will, hard at work drawing. At the front there on the right is Harold Earnshaw, Pat Earnshaw, who I have spoken in previous talks. He lost his right drawing arm on the Somme and learnt to draw with his left. So we know this is pre-war because Pat is drawing with his right hand. You've got Harry Rowntree, who's a humorous artist on the far right, a poster artist, the sort of slightly serious-looking man at the back, is Will True, the poster artist. But then seated at the back, that is John Hassall. Now, I did an exhibition on John Hassall last year, and I wrote a book about him, and I'd been going on about it for a few years, and friends would go, oh yeah, John Hassall, but you could see how blank they were behind their eyes. But if you say John Hassall, people might not know who you're talking about, but if you say, oh, there he is, if you say Skegness is so bracing, everybody will recognise that. And John Hassall is the man behind that poster, but he's also the man behind lots more, lots of other famous posters as well. He was born he was 4 years older than Will. He was born in May 1868. And actually, he didn't go straight into an art education. He failed to get into Sandhurst. He came from a sort of military family. It was expected that he would follow that course as well. He failed to get in, and actually what he did was he was sent off to Canada to become a kind of pioneer farmer. At the age of 20, he took his younger brother Owen. So age 20 and 18, they went up to sort of build their own shack and start slaughtering cattle and chopping wood all day. And he did that for 3 years, but he started to draw and found he had a talent, and he got a picture published in the Daily Graphic, which actually showed a little scene from life in Canada. And when it was published and he was paid for it, he decided that becoming an artist would be a far better job than being a farmer in Canada. And he went and studied art in Belgium, in Antwerp and in Paris, and came out of that in kind of 1894, around the same time as Will was also finding his feet and starting to get published. So, as I said, they're very much contemporaries. Now, this picture on the right, it was published in the Tatler in January 1915, and it's by a friend of John Hassall's and a fellow sketch club member called James Thorpe, and it's called The East Coast is So Bracing. So obviously relates to the East Coast bombardments of Scarborough, Whitby and Hartlepool in December 1914. And this is a complete homage to Hassall's famous poster of 1908. So this was created for the Great Northern Railway in 1908, and by that time Hassall had been working over a decade and had become known as the poster king. His posters were incredibly popular for theatre and for sort of advertisers as well. You may recognise these ones as well. And these were done in the 1890s, just a year or two into him becoming a poster artist. Again, Hassall had ambitions to be a fine artist in the grand manner, a little bit like Heath Robinson, and basically just economics meant that he necessarily had to begin commercial work. So he started contributing to magazines, including The Sketch, and he started to do this poster work. And he was certainly much more a poster artist than Will ever was, but that's what he became known for. But he did a lot more as well. So a few more examples of the kind of thing that he did. I mentioned Scouts earlier. John Hassall was a great friend of Baden-Powell, so he designed the Scouting for Boys picture on the front cover and even incorporated a Boy Scout into his adverts for Veritas mantles. And he created the very first pictorial poster for the London Underground. Frank Pick, when he decided that London Underground posters needed to have some design and some pictures, the first person he went to was John Hassall, and that is the very first one. And I was very lucky to have the original artwork loaned for the exhibition last year. He also was a very prolific book illustrator. This is just one aspect of what he did, these G.A. Henty boys' adventure stories. And on the right are his original sketches, which are held in his archives at the University of Essex. So it's really wonderful to see those original pencil sketches and how they ended up on the actual books. So this is him in his studio. He lived at 88 Kensington Park Road in Notting Hill, and his studio was a kind of place of pilgrimage for other artists, for journalists, for friends, and increasingly over the years it became full, not just of his posters and his pictures, but all sorts of like random weird stuff. I mean, Owen did follow up a military career and brought all sorts of weird things back. So it was always commented upon, but there he is at work in his studio. But like Will, he was too old to join up when war broke out, but his career during the war was incredibly intense. His logbooks exist at Essex University, and particularly for the years 1916, 1917, 1918, the pages, these large logbooks, are absolutely crammed with commissions, about half of which he carried out for free for charities and other worthy wartime causes. This is one job he did, which is the Belgian Relief Fund, a children's painting book, and each page contained an ad. What it was a colouring book for children, but each page was also an advert. So this is an advert for London Opinion magazine, but Schweppes did one, and Harbert's Plasticine. So obviously each advertiser had paid for a page in this colouring book, and that's how they raised the funds. He also produced quite a lot of wartime posters as well. So the one in the middle is First World War, and it was also adapted for, I think, the Kensington Battalion. But it's very interesting to look at the picture on the left, which is a Nestlé's milk advert he did during the time of the Boer War. And he said, he had to work so quickly, he often repurposed original ideas. And you see this again with Hassall. He was the most prolific artist I've come across, and it's unsurprising that sometimes he had to recycle certain characters and designs. You've got the Belgian Canal Boat Fund there on the right. So he's very much known for sort of this swashbuckling, jolly style, but he could do sort of poignant stuff as well if it was required. A couple more posters on the left and right, and also he designed the Ivory Cross Fund little sort of badge. So there were flag days nearly every day of the week during the war where people could buy flags, and this was the one that Hassall designed. And the Ivory Cross Fund was for poor soldiers who needed dental work. And you can imagine if you've got toothache and you're in the trenches, it couldn't be much fun, so quite a worthy cause. The picture in the middle is very interesting. It is Hassall's drawing in a unidentified paper, but it shows his experience of going to the front with a concert party, led by Alfred Lester, who is probably best known for being in The Big Boys Are Here with George Robey. And what Hassall did was he would do drawings on stage. And people say, you know, what do you want to see? And he'd do a quick sketch and he'd give it away, and sometimes he'd auction them. So that's what he did. And he talked about what it was like. And I love his drawings there. What I particularly like in that main picture is you can see they're in this sort of hut somewhere, but the stage has the piano, which is only just balancing on the stage, and somebody's having to sort of hold the piano up so it doesn't topple off the stage. And he also carried out more sort of serious painting commissions. This was done for William Foster of Lincoln, who were sort of the tank, the leading, or the, I don't know, probably somebody here will know more than me, but he went to Lincoln, he went to William Foster's, he got a ride in the tank around the grounds, and he did that picture, which I believe is in Lincoln Art Gallery now. Did this cover for Princess Marie Jose's children's book, which again was a fundraising publication. And I mean, there are just hundreds of things that he did. Warrior's Day, leaflet or brochure cover there, designed by him. And these two pictures, which are two which we have in the archive at Mary Evans, these will be pictures which he will have just drawn at a fundraising event or a fete or something like that. And that picture there, you can see him, I think this is at a fete in somewhere in South London, and he's there with his easel, just ready to draw a funny picture to give away for a few shillings or whatever. So when you see a quick sketch like that done by Hassall come up for auction, that's probably what it was done for. He was very, very generous with his time. And his youngest daughter, Joan, said, you know, one of the reasons he died not very wealthy was because he gave so much away during his lifetime. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I mean, he notes in his diary, Christmas 1915, that he goes to Charing Cross Hospital with a few other people, and he does drawings there on Christmas Day. The following year, on Christmas Eve, he has a load of wounded soldiers come and visit him in the studio, and in the Daily Mirror you can find a picture of him pulling a cracker with a soldier. So he's very much a very energetic fundraiser, and you know, quite a key figure during that time. And on top of all that, he also ran an art school. He started this art school in 1906 with fellow artist Dudley Hardy, and it was very popular. Bruce Bairnsfather trained there, who's another great wartime cartoonist. But when war broke out, obviously it wasn't practical to continue, but he changed it into a correspondence course, and that continued into the 1930s. But they really did target soldiers to take up this correspondence course, considering it, you know, a good use of your time, a way to pass the time, but also to develop skills which might be useful during the war in your career and future, or anything like that. So Hassall would ask people to copy a picture, which he put in his ad, send it to them for a free critique, and then you could sign up for it. And then, as well as all his fundraising activity and his drawing and his commissions, he also served as a special constable. Mainly, he did sentry duty by Buckingham Palace. So he would be working during the day, then he would do his special constable duties at night, and at some point he would sleep. And I found this on eBay a couple of months ago, and I didn't know of its existence. I don't know who it's been written by. Part of me wonders if it was written by him, but probably not. But you can see it's signed by him there, his very recognisable signature, and underneath that SC for Special Constable. And like Will, he's still working in the Second World War. Hassall died in 1948, but was still working right through the Second World War. He complained that he wasn't as popular anymore, but he was so popular in the Edwardian era and the First World War that I don't think it could have been possible for him to be, you know, doing as much work in the Second World War as he was then. But he did he did that painting book back in the First World War, and here we are again doing these, which are rather lovely. So that brings me to the end, and thank you for listening. I have brought a couple of copies of my Hassall book if anybody is interested, you know, it would make anybody interested in poster art, book illustration, in the history of that period, in war and politics of that time, and finding out more about John Hassall. It would make a really good Christmas present. I've also brought along copies of my Heath Robinson book, which is £9.99. The Hassall book is £30. And if you are interested in getting in touch with me, you can email me at hassall@lucindagosling.co.uk, or I'm on Twitter, and always happy to hear from people. And that's it. Thank you for listening. I think I've got a little thank you. There we are, little Heath Robinson man to say thank you.